suggests off of their studies that you run your humidity at around 65 for starting hatching, and then it'll naturally spike once they start pipping. The moisture from inside the eggs will spike the humidity. So sometimes it'll go up quite high. If a lot pip at the same time, it'll go up to like 90, 95. The only time I personally really worry is if there's condensation running, like you can actually see the water running or dripping off the roof, then I'll open up more vents to help let some of the humidity out,
Yeah.
just so they don't drown, right? Um,
Yeah, like last year I was finding almost dry hatching was better, but I think it was just because of the type of year that we had.
yeah, it wasn't the best year.
No.
So what I decided when I was making my notes is I'm mainly just going to talk about what we generally do, like in all the past years, not so much just last year, because last year we did a lot. Like some hatches needed higher humidity, other hatches needed lower humidity. There was a bunch of issues and problems, and it was just a really hard year. And it wasn't normal compared to past hatching years. So um, I personally advise that you should hatch in a separate incubator than what you incubate in, and or clean, like take your eggs out and just allow them to cool and clean out your incubator, disinfect it or whatever, and then put the eggs back in and lock down for for lockdown for hatch. Sorry, and that's just because the high humidity, high temperature of the incubator is prime condition for bacterial blooms. So if your eggs, like say you didn't disinfect your eggs first, lots of people leave the blooms on to hatch. I just think it's better safe than sorry. You might as well try to get all of that past 3.5 weeks cleaned out of the incubator before you go into a hatch. So, yeah, for us, we just rotate. They come out of the incubator and they go into a hatcher. But I mean, that doesn't work for everybody. So I would just clean in between, clean at lockdown.
Yeah.
Um, So then lockdown is the evening of the 26th or the morning of the 27th is what most people do. Uh, I personally lock down when I see them pip into their air cells. So around day 25, I start checking 3 times a day, in the morning, lunch, and in the evening. And if ducklings have gotten into the air cell, and you'll see it, it's like a shadowing inside the air cell. It's really quite clear and distinct. Then I move them into the hatcher. And I only do that because sometimes you'll have a few eggs that are delayed. So if they could still benefit from the turning, where once they go into the hatcher, you're not turning anymore. It's hands off, you're not touching anything, right? So I found that's helped increase our hatch rates doing it that way. But most people, I think, just lock down, same all eggs, same day kind of thing. And that's fine too. It's whatever's going to work best for you, right? Um, then I guess the ducklings will internally pip into the air cell, but then they can rest for up to 48 hours inside that air cell. I find it's most common they're only in there for about 18 to 24 hours. But if it goes into that second day, it's not a huge worry right away. They should have enough air in the air cell for 48 hours of rest. And during that, they're also, like when they peck against the egg to make their external pip, they're hitting their own veins that are in between the two membranes. And when they're hitting those veins, they're actually forcing their body to absorb that blood, right? So it's not like they're just hanging out in there doing nothing. There's the whole process, right? And then from the external pip, it can take potentially another 48 hours. So they can potentially be in lockdown for up to 4 days.
Yeah.
I find it's usually 2 days. They get in the air cell. By the next morning, they're externally pipped, and usually by that evening or the next morning, they've hatched. But if it does take a bit longer, it's not necessarily that concerning right off the bat. Um, what else? I don't think there's a. We can talk about some of the problems you might encounter, unless you have something to add, Heidi.
Geese can usually take a little bit longer than that too. 48 hours.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they.
The geese seem to go a little slower. I've had some that have taken 3 days to fully hatch
Yeah.
after their external pip. Um, I just monitor them. Like if you're checking a few times at least every day, you'll notice if they start. They kind of always have their bills open. They kind of breathe like that. But if they start like almost panting, or um, they were talking and then they quit talking, and you
Hmm.
can see they're still breathing, but just the signs of differences. If they seemed active and then they're not active, then something's probably not going right.
You may have to jump in and help out.
So do we want to talk about helping?
Yes, probably a good idea.
So helping's kind of controversial.
Hmm.
Some people say don't do it, it'll cause weak ducklings or chicks or goslings, and other people do it. So for me personally, I have done it, and there's been other times where I haven't done it.
Hmm.
If I have made a known error in incubating, say my temperature spiked, and I know it's an early hatch, and most likely those ducklings are not have absorbed their yolk or stuff like that, and you delay helping, you can lose a lot of them. But at the same time, if they hatch with their yolks out, you're most likely going to lose a lot of them anyway.
Hmm.
So you just kind of have to do what you're comfortable with. But when I do help, I try to wait the 48 hours from external PIP, and I just monitor them, like I said. I try to give all the rest of the eggs that 48 hours to hatch without me opening the incubator and affecting the humidity and everything like that. Um, I guess my supplies are either clean hands, like I'll disinfect my hands, or tweezers. Some people prefer to use tweezers. A bowl of warm water, Q-tips, and then I warm some coconut oil. Other people use Vaseline or petroleum jelly. And then a warm, damp washcloth and or paper towel. You
Hmm.
just want to make sure everything is absolutely clean, and you just go really, really slow. So where you've seen they've made the pip, you can start peeling the eggshell. And that's why I prefer using my fingers, because I try to leave the membranes totally intact. So I just peel the eggshell off, leaving the inner and the outer membrane together. And then I use the warm water to dip a Q-tip in and moisten the membrane as I'm peeling the shell. And if I see any veins, I just stop. And I'll put the coconut oil onto the membrane, because it helps. I find it helps keep it from drying out way better than Vaseline and other products. So
Yeah,
that's why I prefer to use it. And then they have to go back in the incubator. You can try again in a couple of hours, but if you see red, you should stop.
oh,
They're not ready to hatch. And
definitely.
if you do accidentally uh, rupture a vein, you can kind of like pinch it against the shell and just hold it there, and that will help stop that bleed. Because if it is, they can bleed out, right? Like
Yeah,
if you rupture a vein. So I'll try to stop the bleed if that happens, and then I'll put them back in. And then I'll bring them back out, wrap them in a warm, damp cloth, and you can try again, and just keep going and go slowly, and always start from where they picked.
hmm,
because that's most likely where they've already kind of started to get that blood receding out of the membrane back into their bodies. So that's your safest spot is where they pip to begin. Um, for a lot of ones, if they pip on the wrong end, a lot of them will need help. So you just have to decide. And that can be from a few things. It can be from having them the wrong way in a turner, or they're just malpositioned. They're just not in the right position when they should go to pip into the air cell, because they start out face upside down in the shell and their bums up by the air cell.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it progresses and goes on, they actually kind of curl in on themselves and bring their heads up. So the head's under the wing. And sometimes if your air cells aren't proper size, they're too small or they're too big, they can't get their head tucked in and get it brought back up to pip into the air cell. So that's what I call more so human error. That was my error, not because it's an unhealthy duckling or a weak duckling. If the air cell's a little bit too big for them to maneuver, that's my fault. So I usually do help those ones.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really lost any that we've helped, and we have some here from like 7-8 years ago, and they're just as healthy as the ones who hatched by themselves in the same incubation. So again, it's just kind of I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you feel is right to do.
Mm-hmm. Whatever you feel comfortable to do.
And do you find you have any issues if you're like opening up the incubator, like bringing them in and out, trying to help them with the other ducklings that are still in there?
Well, that's why I try to wait.
Okay.
I'll try to wait until everybody else is hatched.
Okay.
I mean, I have a few times opened to help a gosling when not all the ducklings were hatched.
Mm-hmm.
And this might just sound crazy, but I'll take a blanket and I'll put it over me and the incubator, and I'll get one of my daughters in there with me, and we'll mist around,
Yeah.
and then we'll open the incubator and pull the egg out, right?
Yeah.
We haven't ever really had any shrink wrap issues.
No.
So, like I said, we've done it the odd time, but I would advise trying to wait until everybody else is done hatching, because you kind of have to think, if you have 10 that are pipped and doing well on their own,
Right.
and you have one that's not, you might save the one, but you might kill the 10.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of weigh your options. I've seen other people who have made kind of like a dome around them too, and they'll bring the humidity up with a humidifier, and then they'll open it. Or they'll move their incubator to the bathroom, which I personally wouldn't do, because you're going to drop your temperature and everything else too, right? But yeah, me personally, I try to wait that 48 hours until everybody else is pretty much hatched and they're just in there drying off, and then I'll start taking any if they need help. But
Makes sense.
I guess we could talk a little bit about the common problems.
Yeah, like I find though, if you have some that have already hatched and your humidity is already like way up there, like 80-90%, like just opening it for like less than a second to grab one out isn't, I don't find it really hurts.
Right.
Yeah, if your humidity is higher, definitely. So I had my list of known problems, but I looked on the internet to see what is the most frequent problems with waterfowl eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest problem that I could find is actually sticky membrane.
Ooh.
So sticky membrane it has a few reasons it can be from, but it's low average temperature. So during incubation, your temperature was a little bit too low. or too high of humidity, which will bring me to a point later, but or not enough ventilation. Lots of people will close almost all their vents in order to maintain a higher humidity.
Yeah.
But they don't actually need that much higher of a humidity compared to chickens. They do need a little bit more humidity, but like when I was looking on the Cornell University, they've done a lot of studies on waterfowl, and they suggest that the best incubation humidity was 55%.
Yeah.
And then you go up to 65% for hatching, right? But I kind of had to look because we just chart the air cells. So I raise or lower my humidity depending off of what the air cells need in order to grow or quit growing. So I looked into it anyways, but it makes sense because sticky membrane is from too high of humidity usually. And lots of people, I've seen tons of people saying when you go into lockdown, you need them at like 80, 90, 95%. And then when they start pipping, they're going to naturally boost that humidity. Condensation is going to be running off of the incubators, which the membrane has to be somewhat dried out, or otherwise it is sticky, right?
Yeah.
And if it is sticky, it's like glue. It'll trap them. They can't move. It's like they're stuck in glue. So they just can't get moved around to even do their zip line. After the initial pip, they'll zip all the way around and pop the top off. If they're in sticky membrane, they just can't do that. There's no way. We have had a few sticky membranes. Have you, Heidi?
Oh yeah.
And it is like
It's
when
like
you're
tar.
trying to help them, you can't even get it off your fingers. Like you're constantly cleaning your fingers. It's just, yeah, it's
It's nasty.
yeah. And then they'll have it all over their feathers, and they can't dry properly. And
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, like usually, like I've had last year was actually my first year when I actually experienced it. So I used Q-tips to help them out, like really damp Q-tips and warm water to kind of peel it off. And then when I did get them out, I ended up having to bath them in warm water, like,
Oh,
and then put them back in the incubator to dry out
wow.
just to get that stuff off of them.
yeah. And the next was shrunk wrap. So low temperature, low humidity, too many vents open can all cause shrink wrap issues or people opening the incubator too, or sorry, the hatcher. And then just some other problems. They're not as common, but they're kind of troubleshooting-ish problems. If you have ducklings that are fully formed, but they die without pipping, so they don't make their external pip,
Mm-hmm.
it's usually from low humidity in the incubator or a drastic change in humidity when you go from incubating to lockdown. So we never do, like us personally, we do 5-degree humidity changes. So if I've been incubating at 55% humidity, when they first get into the air cells and I move them into the hatcher, I'll go up to 60% humidity.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the second day, I'll go to 65. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But I have seen lots of people say like a 10 degree difference is okay. So if you go from 55 to 65, it's okay. This is just the way that I've always done it, is kind of that 5 degree change. Because an egg will try to mimic the ambient temperature and humidity. So if you spike your humidity, that egg's going to start drawing water into itself to match the humidity.
Mm.
So then if they're already in the air cells, you can start drowning them in the air cells. They should be breathing air at that point, right? And if it's filling up with water from too high of humidity change, then they can start drowning in their air cells. If they pip and die, like external pip and then they die, they say it's usually from a too low of a humidity or poor ventilation. So not enough of a gas oxygen exchange is going on. So then they die, right? Early hatches is too high of a temperature, usually during incubation, will force them to hatch sooner than they should. Which sometimes there's no problems at all. They hatch a couple days early. They're healthy. Yolks are absorbed, everything. Other times they can be not ready to hatch when they start hatching. So you can end up with yolks still out and problems from that as well. Small weak ducklings is usually from low humidity during incubation. So that air cell just grew too big, took up too much of the egg. The duckling didn't have enough room to grow to a proper size. And then on the opposite side, too large ducklings is from too high of a humidity, which kept the air cell small, so the duckling grew bigger than it should, which can cause problems too, because if they're too big to move around in there, they can't get out as easily, right? And I have noticed that with some of my bottom end pippers, they've been a little bit bigger ducklings. So maybe that's why they couldn't get their head up there where they need to. And then my last point is rough or poorly healed navels is too high temperature or again an excessive humidity change can cause the same thing. Where they might have some yolk still out, or they'll always have kind of like a little scab where the yolk was, like where our belly button is. But it's usually small and it's already kind of dry. It's not, I guess the poorly healed would kind of be more open or really pink or inflamed, or as you get going, you'll start to know what's more normal and not normal. Usually you can't see it. Like their down will cover it.
Okay.
If it's inflamed and pink, it's going to poke through the feathers. You're going to be able to see that.
Yeah.
You just want to keep it as dry as you can. If there is still yolk out when they hatch, you can take like a moist cloth or a moist paper towel and wrap them in that and then stick them inside of a cup. So their head's up, but they're stuck in the cup. They can't move around. And then put it back in the incubator.
Yeah.
And then just make sure you keep that paper towel moist so it doesn't end up sticking to the yolk, and just give them a couple of days to absorb that yolk into their bodies. And sometimes they'll live and be fine after that. You got anything, Heidi?
I think you did pretty good. No, like even if you had to, like with the yolk or whatever, you just gotta make sure the cup's big enough when you put them in there, because sometimes they tip out. They go for a roll.
Yeah. When I did it, we used like it was a cup about this size, but it's a thick glass cup. Like it's clear glass, so it's nice and heavy. And I put him back into the bottom of the eggshell. Like he hatched on his own. And he was dragging his yolk around, and I was scared he was going to rupture it. So I got him, and I got the bottom of his eggshell, and I put his feet and his bum back in the eggshell and wrapped him in the mouth. And then I stuck him in that cup and I put him back in the incubator. And it took about 36 hours. And then his yolk was fully absorbed. And he's still alive.
The poor little guy was like, I just got out of this shell.
7 years ago that was, I think. So I mean he's still doing good.
Yeah, last year I had to help one, and it was one of my black Swedish, and she's still out in my pen now. Yeah, she came out early, so I just wrapped her up and stuck her in a cup, and I think like she had most of it absorbed already, but there was still a little bit there, and I just wrapped her and stuck her in, and I don't even think it was 12 hours later she was good to go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then I let my geese just hatch their own. It's easier.
Oh.
They have better luck than I do.
Well, we kind of talked about that in the incubating one. Geese eggs are a little more care intensive
Yeah.
compared to duck eggs and probably chicken eggs. I mean, I don't know. I've never.
Chickens are pretty easy. Like, they hatched them at the school and that my kids went to, and it was just a matter they stuck them in the incubator and they walked away for like 18 days, and then they come back or whatever after the holiday, and they have baby fluffy chicks in the incubator. So, like, they're really, really easy.
Yeah.
I was wondering that because I was hearing all the crazy. I mean, like last year was a crazy year, anyways, for everybody. And then my friend had gotten one of those homeschool hatching kits for her chickens. So she's just like hand turning them a couple times a day. And it's like, I don't know, I'm not monitoring the humidity or the temperature or anything. I'm sure it'll be fine. And all of her eggs hatched and was just fine.
But, like they said, like chicks are so much easier than ducks. Like ducks are like they're pretty hands on. Like they're not as matter like you can just set them and go, right? Like you have to be there. Like even putting them in turners.
Yeah, or if you're cooling and misting, like to mimic the mother duck leaving and going and swimming and coming back with cold, wet water. If you're trying to mimic that.
Yeah.
And the geese eggs is the same thing. Most people report better hatch rates if they cool their geese eggs, and if they turn them like end over end like this.
Oh.
Instead of rolling.
Like weird. This. Yeah.
For some reason, they report better hatch rates if you turn them like that. I'm actually going to try that this year. Yeah. I'm going to try turning them end over end this year and just see if I mean, the Sebastopols are hard anyways because they're
I'm actually
good fertility and like they're a harder breed.
I'm actually trying that with some of my duck eggs. I'm trying to end over end, see if it actually makes any difference, because to me it didn't even matter, like hand turning to turner to but last year was just a crap year all the way, right?
Yeah, last year was not normal.
No.
By any means. I know I said this in the incubating one too, but I have better hatch rates if I hand turn than if I use roller bar turners with the
Interesting.
duck. I don't know why. I was thinking that I might try to set my rollers go off every 2 hours. So I was thinking maybe I'll tone it back a little bit and see if that helps at all with the duck eggs.
So last year my best hatches were in Richard's cabinet incubator, and their shelves tip. Right?
Yeah.
So you put them in like a tray, like an egg carton, and they tip back and forth, right?
Yeah.
And they go off like it's like a gradual tip, right? So they're constantly moving and they don't stop.
Yeah.
And those were my best hatches I had were from that.
Interesting.
I think having them upright too probably helped, because last year like lots were drowning in air cells, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like people had their humidity as ambient humidity, not adding anything, and they would still pip into the air cell and drown in the air cell. So having them upright probably helped a lot with that too, because when they pipped in, the water would have ran down in by their bums, right? Not up where their
Yeah.
head was.
Hmm.
Yeah, but almost everybody I talked to last year were all having the same problems.
Oh, it was a crazy year, like for everybody.
Yeah. But I did have two more points, I guess I kind of wanted to say. Um, if you're gonna like incubate every year or multiple times a year, I advise you keep notes. So, like your temperatures, your humidities, if you had a power outage, what weeks your eggs were on, if you had a humidity spike, anything like that. But then also your hatch rates and the breed, because then going into the future, like say your cayugas are always drowning in the air cell, but the other breeds in the hatch do perfectly fine. Well, then you will know your cayuga eggs are more porous, they're taking on more humidity, so you should incubate them separate from your other breeds. So it just kind of helps you mm, problem solve, I guess,
Yeah.
if you have all that information and you're not just trying to
To
think
remember.
something happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then fertility is not hatchability. I mean, I technically shouldn't have to say this, but you can get a dozen fertile eggs. Every single one can start to grow. That does not mean they're all going to hatch. There's
Yeah.
so many things that come into play. And I mean, it can be a really big thing when you're selling hatching eggs. So, like for us, we always try to do fertility test runs with
Yeah.
our own incubator, but as well as not sell until we've had hatches too, because there's just those certain things. They can be so much can play into it, right? Human error as well, but breeder error too.
Yeah.
So if your flock is lacking something, you're going to have problem eggs. If that hen doesn't have enough of, say, niacin in her diet, or riboflavin, or selenium, or thiamine, or there's a huge list for herself, she's not putting that into the yolk. So then that duckling who needs to grow and survive off that yolk is not going to do well,
Right.
which I guess kind of leads into an entirely different topic of um, good nutrition for your flock, which honestly is really hard to meet. And even us ourselves, we haven't found all the different sources for all the different levels of vitamins and minerals that a breeding flock needs compared to just a pet group or a group of just eating egg birds. Once you get into breeding, you need to be more adamant about the vitamins and the mineral content that is going into that duck feed.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's different things we are doing. Like the ducking, we don't have a good breeder ration in Canada that I can find. We don't even have, I mean, I love Country Junction. I got nothing against any feed company. I'm not down talking anybody. But when you start looking at studies or even just Metzer Farms page on their nutritional layout of what laying ducks need, breeding ducks, laying geese, and breeding geese, there's no feed that even comes close, not even close. So you can do different things to supplement them, of course, vegetables, like fresh veggies, fruits. Um, you can grow fodder, you can do microgreens, you can add in minerals, you can add in vitamins, like just buying them and adding them into the feed. We started it's called Macro Premix. Country
Mm-hmm.
Junction sells it. So here again, I have nothing against Country Junction. But it's actually made for like a full grain ration. If people are buying bulk grains, they should
Oh.
be adding this mineral into their grains. So I did all the math and all that and found the safe levels with the way we feed with the grains and the country junction grower. And so we mix that into our feed as well. And then, silica grit, obviously, so they can break up those nutrients and everything, right? Break up the food to extract it. I was actually reading a study because I wanted to know the difference in grits, right? I don't know. I just get curious like that. And there's studies on wild waterfowl where they traveled miles and miles and miles just to get a silica form grit
Interesting.
from a quarry or wherever. So I was like, oh well, that's kind of neat. It's obviously one of the best ones for them, right? If the wild ones are traveling so far for it. You can add the water soluble vitamins. You can get those vitamins and they're to be added to water.
Mm-hmm.
But lots of them are paired with electrolytes.
Oh.
And electrolytes are really high in salt content. So for an extended use, that's actually quite bad. It's not good for chickens either. Most
No.
of the studies that I find are mainly chicken based, right? But it's not good for chickens long term, but it's very detrimental to the waterfowl. So if you're going to do a vitamin mix, you should make sure it's not linked to an electrolyte. Um, yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I just try to steer clear of those ones that you put in your water.
Yeah, I think a lot of people overuse them, and I don't know. I would rather find, but the problem is with the water soluble vitamins, they are very important for the waterfowl. They are. That's like your niacin and your other B vitamins. But I'd rather try to find sources of like vegetables or something that I can just add into their diet.
Yeah.
We all know they'll pick through and eat what they want. And
Yeah.
that's why like the free choice calcium, people do free choice kelp, which I was trying to get a line on, but they all work because when the bird knows it needs it, it's drawn to it and they'll go and they'll consume it, right? So if you
Yeah.
do the same thing with vegetables or fodder or microgreens, whatever, growing for them, if they need it, they're going to eat it. If they don't need it, they'll probably avoid it.
Yeah.
They just won't eat it. So I don't know. The only thing I really agree with adding to water is like garlic. It'll boost the immune system. There's studies. I actually have a study that I'll share in the chat where garlic is shown to be effective at killing worm loads. So like roundworm,
Pinworm.
pinworm. Yeah. So and it will help give them that boost for their immunity. It works really well with their immunity. Another one that you can use for the immune system is bee balm. Like we can grow bee balm here. So you would just harvest the leaves and just dry them, and you can keep them and add them to your water, or just give them free choice or whatever.
Yeah.
I guess I don't really have a lot more to say.
It's a lot of good information. I don't have specific questions yet since I haven't hatched yet, but
Oh, it's so much fun.
I got scared from all the stories last year.
Last year was a horrible year, so I mean, this year's got to be